You have just listed the systems that existed, but even now you recalled the Westphalian system and so on. But these are systems that were developed in the West, again in the West, and they spread to the whole world. How is this happening now?
Well, they spread by force to the whole world. But now it's a big question. We have achieved this power of non-globality.
Why? My question is why the forces? There are countries out there. There are many countries coming in, whatever, and they accept these rules of the game.
So they took it by force. They were former colonies. When all of it was created, they were not asked at all, I'm sorry, how it would be organized. I remind you that at the time of the creation of the UN, most of the world was colonies. It's just that they're, as it were, and if we talk, but how the Westphalian system spread to the whole world. Again, through the colonization system. This was not a peaceful colonization. A fleet sailed to you and landed troops, and you joined this system because you had no other options. So let's just not, as it were, create, and people, dear listeners, this Western system of values has been forcibly extended to the rest of the world, and there is nothing wrong with that. I will immediately note that it is normal that great civilizational projects spread themselves by force. This is exactly the norm. In other words, there is nothing shameful in the fact that, if you are applying for a civilizational project, you are ready to promote it by force of arms. This is exactly the norm of international history. That is, there is no need to be ashamed of it, but there is also no need to say that it was nonviolent. That's who everyone was.
Let's get back to the topic after all. Yes, if all these systems were created in the West, then how do you think the new system will be created, and how is it being created?
And now that's the point. You see, now we are in a position, that is, the first stage for this system to be created, it is necessary for people to realize that it needs to be created. At the moment, most of the world's elite, unfortunately, is moving within the logic of, excuse me, a very rude expression, to return everything to the ass. That is, due to the psychological characteristics of the human personality, they cannot admit that the world to which they have been accustomed for the last 30 years will no longer exist. Purely again, we know this at the level of ourselves. Believe me, the people who bend decisions, they are not much different from us in this matter. Therefore, first, there must be a number of crisis events, possible catastrophes, that will force us to recognize the fact that there will be no more in the old way. After that, it opens, I repeat, from the chaos, which most likely will be expressed in a series of different conflicts. In other words, I'm going to something, it will be a single global conflict, as we saw in the Second World War. That is, they think that we will see something similar in the Second World War, but it will be more of a chain. Again, this is why I use the period of the 30 Years' War more, because it was a network of different conflicts in very different areas, that is, many different countries entered, left. Coalitions were created, recreated. In other words, it was such a period of prolonged chaos. And as a result of this chaotic process, when real subjects arise, that is, subjects not on paper, but countries, projects that have proved their subjectivity and their claim to a special status in this new system, then they will renegotiate this agreement. And I think it will also be Western countries. Well, first of all, the United States. For Europe, I'm not very sure, but the USA is for sure. The countries are part of the southern countries. Russia, I think, will remain on this list. So yes, but it will be later.
Several questions at once. You said that the countries that will become subjects not on paper, but by deed, will prove that you relate to the case. This is a very important point.
Well, because the ability to declare,
Neighbor's right, and she thinks this is the case. Yes, come on.
this is the case, this is, no, oh, this, and once again this case. I like it, but I don't like it. The case is a very simple combination. You set your goal, and you are ready to achieve it, and you are able to achieve it. A very simple criterion.
That is, we say that. That is, in this world by and large, then only what you have just said will matter. Then it's completely. Then this is the world of the conditional halves and Russia.
Well, please, if you want so, then yes.
And if not, there is another one.
Are we watching?
Option.
Well, I don't see any other option, because again, I don't see any country capable of global hegemony right now. A very important moment is to subjugate the whole world to ourselves. There is, of course, another scenario, which, well, it seems to me, is even more disgusting. This is the scenario of the global Tower of Babel. That is, the notorious idea of a world government. And there are groups that slaves are trying to, let's say, They are acting with conditional hypotheses in this regard, because they are trying to create as much world chaos as possible, so that they can try to build a Tower of Babel out of this international, as it were, world government, on the ruins of this chaos. It sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory, but you asked me what alternative scenario there is. Here is an alternative scenario. Well, that is, there are people who are seriously working on it. The notorious International Economic Forum, the notorious United Nations. In fact, they are the conductors of this project. But it just seems unlikely to me, because of the peculiarities of human nature. That is, because of the natural characteristics of people again. In other words, it requires too much competence from world managers, which they have not demonstrated in much better circumstances.
You said that the Western system was forcefully extended to the whole world. Then the question is, how did China become possible in the form it is, India in the form it is, even Russia in the form it is, I do not know, and other countries in the form they are, because when all this spreads by force, then, as a result of force, you must have a result. You said it yourself, the deal, if it was spread, had to be achieved.
Of course.
And it turns out not achieved.
No, once again, Lyudmila, look, when we say that it was widely distributed, we just download at different time points. Look at the beginning of the 20th century. Look at India at the beginning of the 20th century. Look at China at the beginning of the 20th century, when they were colonized by the West and included in the system of international relations of this Western type. Then other processes began, that is, completely different processes.
Which ones? That's interesting. And then what were these processes called? That's interesting then. Well, because
These processes. No, well, colonization was followed by decolonization. That is, gradually after this order was forcibly extended to the whole world. It turned out, in my opinion, by the way, the very same scheme began here. It turned out to be too complicated to reproduce. It started in it, that is, they did not conditionally hold it. That is, relatively speaking, Western countries were able to spread it, but they could not keep it. And gradually the transformation process began. The same transformation of China, transformation of India. But it was a consequence, and it was already later. In other words, at first, it was a force of propagation, and then the process of maturing, let's say. Other subjects, other countries within this order began first. But in the end, now they have become so big and strong, what they are, that is, they have become too big for this old order. And this is also one of the reasons, that is, conditionally, both China, India, and modern Russia, they are too big for the old liberal order that was built.
then why? That's how you said, wait a second. It's interesting. The end of the Western-centric world did not come when the process of decolonization began, but is coming now, because it was then. Yes.
Well, no, well, it depends. No, why? We can say that in a sense, it came right then. It's just a long historical process. It lasts. That is, and another very important point, it has to do. There was an illusion in the 90s, by the way, that the fall of the Soviet Union would really lead to the creation of a harmonious, notorious world governance. That is, that it will really be possible to create this very world, by the way, about which you tried to think of an alternative today, which will be pleasant and favorable for everyone, that is, in which everyone will be on equal terms, whom everyone will respect each other. And here there was a tragedy, that the West itself was not ready for this. I just didn't seem ready for it. He couldn't do it himself. He could not accept other countries as his equals. And this is not surprising, because, well, in the cultural code of the West, there is a fundamental difference between the jungle and the barrel, on a white man, not a white man, on those who teach, but on those who are half demons, half children from Rudyard Kipling. This is the basis of the Western cultural code. Hedgehogs can't become mice, sorry. Now, but already in the late 90s, we see crisis processes. In fact, right now, after the fact, we understand that the inevitability of the collapse of this attempt to build a single global, liberal world order occurred in Yugoslavia. In other words, the collapse of Yugoslavia, and the fact that, without a mandate, he alone, the West, carried out military operations there, showed what was the first such fundamental call, that there would not be this world of sovereign equality of all with all. And the parties began to look closely at, well, let's say, more basic historical models that have worked for millennia. And then there was cancer, then there was Afghanistan, then there was Libya, and so on and so forth. That is, it accumulated. So again, you see, we're talking about processes. None of them are super fast. Each of them there requires conditionally their decades in disclosure. Yes, and gradually it was revealed. It's just that we are now coming to a point where you know there is water on the surface of the glass, and now you can throw droplets into it. Throw, and then suddenly the water overflows. That's about the same thing happening today. Today, we are very close to turning the droplets upside down.
I want to go back, remember, to where I started. Here's to the image of a free economy, yes, which recalled where cars move. They are different, they have different drivers behind the wheel, they are moving in different directions, they have different goals, different interests. They may hate each other, but they're still trying not to bump into each other. Yes, this, I repeat, is not an image of an ideal world where everyone is equal, where democracy is everywhere. On the contrary, this is just the image of a world where everyone is different, where everyone has their own interests, everyone moves in different directions. Blah.
Who set the rules? Because the question is a very simple question. Who set the rules of the road in this?
Traffic rules, do you know?
But you don't. And here is the fundamental point. Anyone. But if we take the real experience of cars, then they all drive according to the rules. If you remove all traffic lights, if you remove all traffic rules, and you just have accidents, chaos, someone cut someone off, someone crashed into someone, there is no harmony. In general, who is the traffic cop in this system? This is the notorious question of the world hegemon. The fact that without a hegemon, without a world traffic cop, it doesn't work.
Does this mean that no world without a hegemon will then be a peaceful world? Sorry for.
Oh yes, of course, yes.
So you said that the world will be without hegemons. It will not be. You said about the world of the great from the great countries. It's interesting.
Yes, so I didn't promise you peace.
In general,
No. Well, the world in the context of the eternal is not, because its entire history is not just history again, it is the history of the war, the truce between the wars. As it was, so it will be. And there is nothing new under the sun. Everything that was, everything that will be. As the wise Ecclesiastes said.
maybe then the world will find a hegemon and calm down in the end. He'll decide it's cheaper this way.
No one.
More comfortable.
No, that's it.
No.
Well, no, it won't work. It didn't work out. Well, because if it didn't work out in the USA for a picket, then it's unlikely that anyone will succeed at all.
And then the last question. Pavel, do you think that in the near future, we will see that the Western and non-Western world, they will move away from each other? I honestly admit that I had such a feeling when I got the impression that these worlds seemed to diverge from each other, but now I have a completely different feeling when you start reading about the economy, about many, many other things, about cooperation, about interpenetration, about interests, about how you look at how China works with Europe, Europe works with China. I do not know how it works, they're in Africa, and so on. In other words, we see that now it is somehow thought differently. I don't know what your feelings are.
I have a feeling, I repeat, I have a feeling that, of course, the interpenetration will continue. Moreover, all countries will offer the maximum efforts available to them in order to preserve this interpenetration as much as possible. But, according to the tectonic forces that are unfolding now, there will still be a certain discrepancy. I will repeat this famous phrase, before the first one uttered by the historian Parvaraka himself, in my opinion, or maybe I am mistaken by whom exactly regarding the First World War. No one wanted war, and therefore it was inevitable. This is a certain period of mutual divergence and simplification. It will be according to this scenario. No one will want him. Everyone will make the maximum possible human superhuman efforts to preserve it. But it still won't work.
We never said a word.
Due to the absence of the notorious traffic cop.
We have never once remembered the war in Russia against Ukraine. In all this context, how do you think events can develop in the context of what we talked about today?
What do you mean? It's just a very multifaceted question, specifically. Probably try it somehow or something.
Well, I'm narrowing it down right. In other words, at the beginning, there was a very simple understanding that we did not want this war that Russia is waging against Ukraine to be perceived only as a war of Russia against Ukraine. Well, because that would be wrong. When we expanded these horizons, then we saw that they really expanded. We have seen how many countries have become involved in this war in one way or another, directly or indirectly. And so, this This war has spread very widely. Yes, those who supply weapons, those who fight, those who kill, those who do not kill, those who want to make peace, those who invent the 12 principles of peace establishment. That is, yes, African leaders who are going, and for some reason are negotiating for peace to come. Yes, that is, it somehow spread and captured everything. You know, it's like such an octopus. Yes, in some kind of geometric progression. Here, and in this sense, it would not be desirable to be between two worlds, right? That's between the collisions of one world and another. But on the other hand, we have already noted that these worlds are somehow beginning to penetrate more after going through a certain period of such a rigid, perhaps rigid misunderstanding. They understand that it is probably impossible without penetration somehow. And in this sense, it's interesting. How do you understand what will happen to the war then? What can happen to the war here?
No, well, there will be a war. The war will continue. It will end with the surrender of one of the parties. This is basically obvious. This movement of all sides, in my opinion, around Ukraine, unfortunately, is hypocrisy on all sides. This is not about mutual penetration. This is about a training ground where each of the participants tries to somehow lose their grievances with the third and fourth, fifth parties, if we are serious. And this, I repeat, will continue until there is a surrender of one of the parties.
So that everything is as simple as in medieval times.
Well, it's much simpler than it seems, yes.
So you think everything will be decided on the battlefield?
Yes.